Hi everyone, Daniel Linder here. In case you haven't noticed, I have a change of scenery here, so I'm out there on my deck and I feel good. I like being out here. I'm the creator of the relationship model of addiction, and I am here. I want to be a light for you on the stormy sea of recovery. That's what I want to do for you, these video blogs. So last 2 or 3 months, we've been talking about the first stage of recovery, the breakup, and we just started talking about the second stage of recovery, which is developing a relationship with yourself. And so along that line, I want to talk to you about experience and how experience plays into this, particularly my experience. And I have this incredible experience yesterday, the last 3 days, that I learned so much I want to share with you about. I was at a 3-day conference, a training in San Francisco for working with compulsive gamblers. And I don't know how many of you know, but I have a history. That's my primary addiction, compulsive gambling. So here I was in this room of 55 therapists, very qualified, licensed, empathetic, skilled therapists, and they had presenters that were psychologists, very tops in their field, have very bustling practices with compulsive gamblers and substance dependent people, other addicts, and they are very knowledgeable, know all the research, have good practices, and seem to be having good results. However, the most incredible, I have never had this experience before, where I was in a room of 55 people talking about compulsive gambling, and I was the only one in the room who was a compulsive gambler. So it's like they were talking about me. It was like I was more than a fly on the wall. I was one of them. I was kind of like a spy. And just the experience, just the realization of being in the room for 3 days with people, experts or people that were going to treat compulsive gamblers, that none of them had the experience of being a compulsive gambler and being in recovery from compulsive gambling. So I felt like I had so much more to bring to the table for them. And there's all these ideas and about approaches, all this research and approaches about compulsive gambling. And there was, I thought, a lot of confusion about whether you treat it as a symptom or as a primary problem, or whether talking about the thoughts of compulsive gamblers when, they were all in denial, as I know from my experience. So what I wanted to do is just kind of highlight, I want to tell you that I'm clear now that the relationship model of addiction that I've developed, that applies to compulsive gambling, substance dependence, porn addiction, sex addiction, love addiction, and codependency, come from primarily my experience as opposed to my academic training and experience working in the field. It comes from my experience. So, and in terms of recovery, what I have found that is so key when you're working, if you're a compulsive gambler or you're any addict, but especially if you're a compulsive gambler, that part of the recovery process is, like, as we were talking about for 2 months, breaking up, and what breaking up means is dismantling denial is one thing, and the different parts of dismantling denial, about discovery, going back to the discovery experience and realizing that it's a bad relationship. And so you could kind of see through your denial and get out of denial and kind of get in reality and see the relationship that you have with the compulsive gambling, let's say, if that's your deal, to be able to get out of your denial and see it for what it is, so you can break up, is a key part of recovery. So I wanted to kind of highlight, again, because I didn't get up and talk during these 3 days that I was there, and I wanted to so badly, but I think I'm going to come back and do more training with professionals who are working with addicts and particularly compulsive gamblers. So one thing is, in the process of recovery, coming out, we talked about this, and breaking up and moving towards developing a relationship with yourself, your experience needs to come out so you can become more aware of your experience. Now, for me, the key areas of the experience of being a compulsive gambler are thus. One thing is that needs to be addressed is the rush and the high that occurs when I'm compulsive, when anyone, well, I'm thinking that my experience as a compulsive gambler is very similar, if not the same, as all other compulsive gamblers. That may be a little bit of a stretch, but I know that there's a rush or a high that occurs when I'm gambling. And so there must be some need for that high, because if there wasn't a need for it, I wouldn't get that high and it wouldn't be so irresistible. So it's that rush that needs to be identified and experienced, and we talked about kind of going back to the discovery experience. So that's one thing that needs to happen, where you kind of get in touch with the rush or the high that accompanies the experience of gambling. Another is denial. I was so in denial. When you're in your addiction and you're compulsively gambling, your thoughts are irrational. Your thoughts are contrived. Denial is distorting your perceptions, and you do not know that your perceptions are distorted. So your judgment is impaired. You're not thinking clearly. You're not seeing things as they are. You're not making the connections that you need to be making. That is the results of the compulsion of the compulsive gambling, like going bankrupt, like having marital problems, like being homeless, like all the horrible things that happen. The destruction that happens is not linked to the gambling behavior. I mean, so there's that denial. And also going back to the rush and the high of it is that there's this lack of control and a desperation that we go through as compulsive gamblers. There's a total lack of control that needs to be identified, that needs to be acknowledged. You need to become aware of it. You need to share and come out about it and admit that you were completely out of control. When I was gambling, when I'm in the throes of my gambling, I'm consumed with it. I'm thinking about it all the time. And I'm thinking about it the next week. I'm thinking about the game that I'm going to bet on, and my whole life revolves around it. So it's that connection in the process of breaking up that needs to happen, that the realization of how out of control you are, to really get that. Also, the secrecy that's involved, the secrecy and the deceit, the concealment, and the secret love affair that I talk about. Many compulsive gamblers, well, many people working with compulsive gamblers don't realize how much secrecy is a part of the experience of compulsive gambling and what that secrecy does. And the way it isolates you from other, kind of puts you into a world of your own and makes you unavailable for relationships, makes you untrustworthy, makes you deceitful, and oftentimes that's uncharacteristic of the way you usually are. That's one of the definitions of addiction, is that you behave uncharacteristically. So the secrecy is another part of the experience that needs to be acknowledged and shared about, to come out with, so you could eventually, when you're having that experience, you could see it as part of the addiction. And let's see, there was, well, another thing related to what I just said is that the recognition of being completely unable to be in a relationship, that your addiction is your primary relationship, and basically when you're in the throes of your addiction, you can't really relate to other people. You're not accessible. You're lying a lot. You're caught up. Your energy and attention is elsewhere. No one's going to really you're not going to be able to come out. You're not going to really be able to tend to anyone else and connect with anyone else either, because your whole life revolves around and is consumed by this primary relationship with the means of relief, in this case, gambling. So to wrap this up, what I wanted to emphasize two things. One is that I'm coming from a place of experience in the relationship model of addiction. I'm coming from my own personal experience with addiction, primarily compulsive gambling, and my recovery from that. And secondly, going back to what we're talking now about in this stage of recovery, developing a relationship with yourself, it's really about becoming aware of your experience and reality and what really happens to you when you're in your addiction, so that you can contrast when you're in your addiction with when you're in recovery or when you're not in your addiction, and contrast the difference. So as long as you're aware of what your experience is, you'll be able to make that contrast and make a decision, an action that's based on your awareness of your experience. So this is what's going into today. I was actually blown away being there for 3 days, this fly-on-the-wall experience, being with professionals like myself who have never been 55 therapists and psychologists and researchers and very, very effective people in the field and treatment providers who do not have the experience of being a compulsive gambler. So therefore, they could not really address the experiential aspects of it. So, all right, well, I hope that that helps you move through this stage of recovery, which is developing a relationship with yourself, because it involves becoming aware of what your experience is, and particularly in all these areas. So until then, the quality of your relationships is the quality of your life.